Good morning and Happy New Year.
Good morning, Chris.
2023.
Whole new year, maybe marginally better, all of us, right? Can't say whole new because there's not anything wrong with anybody.
I get it.
I don't know if I'm not feeling brave enough to be hopeful after the last few years.
All right, well, we're at 8:30, so let's call this meeting to order. Call the meeting, the Special Alcohol Tax Advisory Committee meeting to order at 8:30. Our first agenda item is a discussion of the staff memo regarding the special alcohol funds. Did everybody have a chance to peruse the memo that Brandon had sent out? And was there any questions or comments that they might have that they want to discuss or have for staff? Actually, before I do that, Brandon, do I need to do like a roll call, or we have a quorum? I guess we have 4 members here, so we do have a quorum, right?
Yes, that's correct, Chris.
Okay. So no need for this, Chris. No need for a roll call or anything since we have a quorum.
Yeah, I think you're good to go. You're good to proceed.
Fantastic. All right. So anybody have any comments or questions for staff or discussion amongst the committee members regarding the memo on the provided by staff?
Brandon, would you be willing to just go over that memo?
Sure.
Kind of talk through it with the group?
Sure. Yes. Happy to do that. So the memo was prepared in response to concerns from board members about the legality of the special alcohol fund, and just to make sure we're all kind of share the same understanding of the city budget. Municipalities in Kansas budget by fund. So special alcohol fund, when I say that, I'm talking about a segmented single fund, one of a couple dozen different funds, such as the general fund or the utilities fund. And so the concern was related to interpretation of city code and specifically the code that addresses the Special Alcohol Fund Advisory Board. Those of you serving on the board in this capacity, and the use of special alcohol funds for various city departments for the city department's operating budget. And so I know that has been an ongoing conversation. I've not been involved in it for the entirety of the last year and a half, 2 years. But I tried to get up to speed on that and just provide sort of just a fact-based analysis of the city code, and in my finding and the city attorney's finding, the budget, we don't have any concerns about the legality of the budget. It is compliant with city code. Ultimately, the city code that does address the Special Alcohol Fund Advisory Board, it does designate the final decision-making authority with the city commission, and it provides a number of different examples of appropriate uses for special alcohol funds. Some of those, I think, naturally would be used by city departments, and I did cite one example, which would be law enforcement or municipal court purposes. Obviously, we're not going to contract out law enforcement. We're most likely not going to contract out most municipal court services, although we do some like indigent defense and some other types of contractual services through municipal court. And so basically, I know that doesn't resolve the issue about potential changes to the scope of the advisory board. I wasn't trying to get into that. I think that's really more of a conversation to be had between the advisory board and the city commission rather than staff inserting our opinion or our theories about that. And so just tried to stick to fact-based analysis of the ordinance and address that concern about the legality of the special alcohol fund expenditures for 2022 and 2023. So happy to follow up with any questions if there are any.
I think this is Chris. I think the important
If you
part.
guys can hear me, I'm working on trying to get in on audio. I can't, it doesn't seem to be working. I'm going to zoom out and zoom back in.
We can hear you, Dorothy.
I think this is Chris. The important piece of that I take out of all this is, we never questioned the transitioning to a housing initiative on this, that we were very supportive of the usage of that, is just making sure that that there was a direct connection to what the ordinance said about prevention of drug and alcohol abuse. And the memo, I think, provides a clearer picture of how the city is seeing the usage of those funds. And there is, section 2, I think 2G, where it says all other, and you cited it in your memo, all other activities that the city views as a way to I should probably say it clear, any program that board determines to discourage, prevent, or intervene and address issues related to alcohol and drug abuse, I think is a broad enough spectrum to say that the housing initiatives that the city is doing, this does fall under that. I think it's still always just process and procedure of, I know the budgeting process historically has been, we're listing out all of the organizations that are part of the budget, and then I switched to where the 800,000 is what's being approved by the city commission from a funding perspective, and then the departments are then making the decision in a less open forum, less transparent way of how those funds are being approved and applied for and distributed. But again, that's kind of a process thing. So I appreciate the letter and some of the clarity, and I'm glad that we're all on the same page. I think still process and procedure is something that we want to make sure that we have that discussion about moving forward. But yeah, I think that's all I have. Anybody else have anything else?
Daniel B. Smith. Yeah, Chris, I appreciate you saying the word transparency, because I feel like that's probably going to come up quite a bit. I feel like that's probably a large component of this. I do feel like, as far as us looking at the actual wording of the ordinance and trying to determine whether the current procedure is living up to that expectation, I know that there's a couple of things being bounced around, one of which is the idea of, I think 30% going specifically to prevention. And I agree with you, as you just said. I think that a lot of what we're seeing here definitely does meet that. To me, the thing that sticks out as being the sort of procedural, potentially the procedural misstep, as far as I remember, is that the ordinance specifically says that we're supposed to be, the Special Alcohol Funding Advisory Board is supposed to be consulted before allocating funds to organizations. And it does say that the city can freely allocate those funds to, city departments. I'm just looking at this memo in front of me, though, and it's listing a bunch of fantastic organizations that are not city departments. And I think that's really what's confusing is, saying that the city can allocate these funds without our input to city departments is one thing. But I think that allocating those funds to a city department to then reallocate to a non-city entity seems like that is, obviously there's, you have to interpret, and there's people whose whole jobs is doing that sort of thing. But to me, it seems like the intention of the ordinance is that, if these funds are going to leave the city and go to an outside organization, then, it's expected that we would vet them or hear out their proposals and make sure that is an allocation that we would at least advise. Obviously, we have no actual power to approve anything, but we would give our input and advise that. And all of the organizations that are listed here, I've said this every time we've ever met, all the organizations that are listed here are great, and we probably do approve of them in general. And, who knows, we might have even made a similar recommendation. But it does seem like the ordinance, as it's written specifically, is, my interpretation is that if the funds are going to leave the city and go to an outside organization, then we're supposed to at least have the opportunity to say something, at least give our input, and also honestly have, I think, Mandy's brought up before, have that process for them to apply so that, it's a little bit more equitable as far as who is being heard. Because, I mean, if we only ever give funding to the organizations we know about, we're never going to learn about any organizations we don't already know about. And it just creates sort of a sealed ecosystem. So I think that to me, that is the issue, not necessarily the 30%, that part of it, but the idea that the city should not be allocating funds to outside organizations, internally, if the housing initiatives, department internally is going to be doing something with that money, then I think that by all means, the city, by my interpretation, the city is free to do that. But when we're looking at, like the community shelter, which is not a city department, to me, before funding goes to them, that's the juncture at which, we're allowed to throw our 2 cents into the wishing well. So.
I joined this group when we apparently became obsolete. And so I think my biggest concern as a citizen is somebody who wants something done, not just about, I want something done to help the homeless, but mostly drug addiction or any kind of abuse. And I'm just wondering how do you give these funds to people, but how is there follow through? Are you seeing what they're doing? Are you seeing if it's making a dent in this problem? That's what I'm really concerned about, that, because if you give them money, you can throw money at lots of things, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I don't know how the city does it with the homeless funds that are going out. And since I wasn't here before, I don't know if we did it too. I don't know if we had a follow through on those who we had recommended to get the grants.
I think that's a perfect question, Dorothy, and it really gets to the heart of how this all started. And without getting too far into the history, we were early on, the justification for eliminating our role was that the outcomes that these agencies were reporting, the way we were sort of evaluating their performance, didn't align with the strategic plan goals. So that was one of the pieces of rationale that the city staff used, and that we weren't actually evaluating things in the way at the level that they wanted. So they were saying our level of evaluation wasn't good enough. And then the process has evolved into one with no oversight, no evaluation, no outcomes, no reporting. So I really appreciate that question. Brandon?
Yeah, I can address that. We have contracts for services. And so, I think part of this transition has been more of a grant process where the board recommends, essentially what are grants to some of these external agencies to perform the work that they propose should be performed. And a lot of that, I think, in the past was probably based on the missions of those agencies who were proposing those grants. And what we're doing now, and I will say it is common for City of Lawrence or really any municipal government to procure services through contracts, and we have a very robust procurement policy, purchasing policy, and especially as a local government, we are bound by certain requirements for transparency and competitiveness and other considerations for purchasing. So, it may not be transparent in the way that the public or the advisory board is discussing it in a public forum and making decisions about it, but our procurement processes do have to meet some pretty stringent expectations for transparency. And so anyway, the contracts that we have with these agencies really are designed for more specific outcomes. And those outcomes really are motivated by some of our key performance indicators that were developed during the strategic planning process. And that is how we hope the community evaluates our organization by the ability to move the needle, if you will, on some of those key performance indicators.
Can I interject real quick, please? My apology if that's inappropriate for me to interject, but I don't think anyone's challenging the, this again, Kim Johnson, I don't think anyone's challenging the long dialogue of explanation of how the state and or city have to follow specific guidelines for contracting. Yeah. I believe that, and you know, sometimes we can get a little winded when we're trying to justify why the city or state do certain things, but no one's challenging that. What we're asking is, and again, I just want to hug Daniel for saying the word transparency. All we're asking for is, Brandon, what are the outcomes, right? You paid a significant amount of money for outcomes. And what are they?
Sheltering and case management.
Sorry, I'm very sorry again for interrupting. I don't want if you pay for research, then what you get from research in outcomes is you get measurables. And measurables are not refrigerator, oven, stove. They are 29 refrigerators, 14 stoves, 15 microwaves. What are the measurable outcomes? Where is a graph showing the outcomes of the money allocated to an agency to measure? That's what we want.
Understood.
I used to be a teacher. I'm a retired teacher. Well, actually, I'm still teaching, but anyway, I look at the it's called planning backwards, and you look at what you want to have happen. This is the goal, and then you have all these steps to make it happen. And I guess part of it is, what are the goal to me is what is the goal? I mean, I know the goal would be ideally to have no homeless and get everybody off of drugs, but I'm just wondering that's what I'd like to see here, you know. Does that make sense?
And that's what I was trying to explain, is that we have contracts that do spell out service level expectations. So I apologize for the long-winded response. I was just trying to address a number of different concerns that were expressed. So Danny, do you have the contracts you want to?
Well, Danny Walters with the Housing Initiatives Division. I was not prepared with the contracts or that information for this meeting. But I can say that the contracts do have measurables in there. There is a report that is due to us on those measurables in February that will be shared out with commission and with the boards. And I will say that something that's a little bit different is, I feel like before there was a lot of dependency on kind of that final annual report that was submitted. But, you know, for instance, in the case of Burt Nash, our staff is doing ride-alongs with Burt Nash. Our staff is in those meetings with Burt Nash. We are walking hand in hand in a partnership with them through the entire thing. We're just not allocating funds and saying, cool, we'll talk to you in February. That's definitely not the approach that we've taken. We're trying to look at this issue and look at what we're doing here holistically and how it impacts the entire system. So again, I apologize. I came prepared with the ARP information. I didn't pull the contracts for this meeting, but yes, I can assure you there are measurables. There are, you know, definite focus on what we are getting for the funding.
And
So
with
I
that,
hope
this
that
is Kim Johnson, and thank you for that extra iteration. What date is this report due to you?
If I remember right, I believe it is February 15th.
Okay.
Is the date.
And is this the final report, or is this the initial report for you to review, ask questions, and then them to go back and fill in any details?
It definitely can function in both capacities. It's their final report.
Have you received a report to date, or is this the first report that you'll be receiving?
This will be the first report that we're receiving.
Okay. So it'll be the report that you can review and
absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in research 25 years, and so that's why I have the research hat on in this equation.
Yeah,
and then the ride-alongs and all of this additional information that you just stated. Again, no one's challenging that these things are happening. I think that this is the first time we've heard about ride-alongs, right? So we just, as the advisory committee, we're just trying to benefit the community equally as much as you guys are. We're just trying to do it with the lens of transparency.
Daniel B. Smith, I also wanted to, going back to the discussion of process, obviously as transparency, but just the process and honestly for me, and I feel like a lot of us in these discussions previously, we've talked about just us as advisory board members, just trying to fulfill our duties that we signed up for. And I think one of the things, and again, I'm very much not a lawyer, but one of the things reading over, talking about the city's ability to allocate funds, I totally agree with Brandon, what you were saying earlier, that the city is within, is able to do that as it wishes. To me, the thing that is sort of a wrench in that is that the city itself are the ones who created the ordinance to create this advisory board, and within that, it says that if the city wants to allocate these funds to outside organizations, we have to be allowed to talk about it. So to me, that's the thing, and when we've talked in these meetings previously, the city is also within its ability, or power to change that ordinance, to do all these things. But I feel like we're in a situation where the ordinance hasn't been changed, and so it seems like we're still supposed to give input on external funding allocations prior to that going forward. So, and that could be changed, obviously, but it seems it wasn't changed, and maybe eventually it will be, but it seems like things are kind of ahead of, the implementation seems like it's ahead of the changes to the process. The process needs to be updated so to match what the city wants to do before going forward. And it feels, at least to me, like the current way the process is being carried out doesn't necessarily match with the way it's written down that it's supposed to go forward. And again, that could change, but it seems like things have kind of hastily been, we're already on to the new process before actually changing the written word of how it's supposed to be. And honestly, I brought this up before, that, all of us are here voluntarily. This isn't a monthly meeting. It's only, it's not super frequent, but, I don't know how long it's been that we've been meeting since we actually gave any advice to the city commission on how to allocate these funds. So we've talked about the process and allocation of funds a lot, but as far as actually doing the thing that we were asked to do, we haven't done much of it in quite a long time. And honestly, it's been a long time since we've, started asking questions that we even gotten any answers as to why. I think that if we were given an opportunity to give input on the process, as the ordinance sort of implies we should, it's possible we would have just recommended the exact same course of action that the city's taken. I don't think that there's actually much all the organizations that are receiving funding are organizations that we believe in, and I totally agree. They all make huge impacts in, especially even specifically in this area around housing. So it just, to me, that the lingering question is if we are on the same page as far as the impacts these organizations have, and would likely have recommended at least a similar level of funding, if not, the exact same course of action that the city's taken, then it seems like, there's really no reason why we couldn't have just been asked to give input, especially since our input can always just be ignored completely. So it just seems kind of silly that we're just being skipped over for no reason, even though we have no actual power. So
on a lot of really important points with the timeline and our role and the history. So, I joined this group in March of 2021. And so I know from at least back until then to that date, we haven't done any grant making. We reviewed the RFP and the report and all that. But Brandon, you are inheriting, I think that really this started about May of 2021, where the board has really just been kind of jerked around. And I agree with Dan that I'm not sure that we would even be at this place right now if, like, since this was announced in August when those budget conversations went public. Well, I guess in July too, there's a commission meeting, but when we started talking about that 2022 budget, this board started getting excuse after excuse and promise and this statement and this accusation nonstop. And every meeting was, well, we don't know. And this is all stuff that you're inheriting that you weren't part of. So I hope you don't get too frustrated with us coming at you with a year and a half's worth of our own frustrations that you weren't here for. And to go back to the reporting thing, like one of the first accusations that we received was that our reports didn't align with the strategic plan, the reports that we had, the outcomes that we had the agencies report on. Those were written before the strategic plan came out. And I can't imagine that the city manager didn't understand that, So it really felt like we were being thrown under the bus as an underperforming board. That felt very strategic. And so it just really set the tone from the beginning of mistrust, So we have the timeline, and we have all of this history here that has brought us to this point. And it is, I don't want to dismiss it. I do feel like we need to answer these questions, but I do just want to acknowledge that for your sake, that we do know that you weren't here for that. And like a big piece of it this whole time, and correct me if I'm wrong, because my memory isn't great, but like I said in my email to you, Brandon, I believe that was the very first time that we were able to get the city to say homelessness direct services is in alignment with the use of the alcohol tax funds. It is alcohol and drug abuse prevention and treatment. And we can't say that for the city. I can't give you that language. I can't give the city manager that language to say back to us so we can say, okay, then we've done our job. I need the city to say that to us. And why is that hard? Why didn't that happen? I mean, you could have set it for the DECA funds, the $600,000 that went to DECA. That could have been alcohol tax money. And just say, that literally is alcohol and drug abuse treatment for people who need housing. It's a perfect alignment, but we can't serve that to the city on a silver platter. The city, we just wanted the city from the beginning to come to us with honesty and transparency. And we just kept being told that we weren't doing our job and being gaslit, So that's how we kind of got to this point.
This is Chris. I think everybody's had an opportunity to speak. Tim, is there anything that you would any comments or questions for staff as it relates to the memo?
I think it's been pretty well laid out. So no, I don't have any comment right now.
Perfect. The only question I have, and Brandon, is the spreadsheet that staff had put together, I didn't see that in the document or the packet of information as part of the agenda. Is that something that we can make public? Is that appropriate to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think we could probably either modify this agenda or figure out some other way of publishing it so it's associated with the board's materials.
Okay, because you do mention it in the memo, so I think it's
yes,
the spending that it's a value to see kind of how we have spent it to date.
Yes.
The one question I had as it relates to it is it appropriate if we can pull that up on the screen? Is that appropriate to do at this point?
I can pull it up. Yes.
Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
No, that's just fine. Okay, are you seeing the memo now, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This is not the best view, but I can't get that thumbnail on the side to go away. Sorry.
3 dashes at the top left.
There we go. Thanks, Kurt.
What I was hoping to see is that the spreadsheet that you would
Oh, the
forward to us.
spreadsheet. I'm sorry. Okay. Give me just a moment.
I didn't mean to cut anybody off. If anybody else had anything further to say, feel free to do it as he's pulling that up. I just want to kind of make sure that we're respecting everybody's time and everybody had a chance to speak.
I hope you'll cut me off sooner in the future. I get going.
Okay, Chris, can you see the spreadsheet now?
Yep, I can. Does everybody else?
Okay.
Everybody can see that? I just wanted to make sure that as we've talked about this, we've mentioned Bert Nash receiving funding, and just wanted to make sure this is something that everybody's seen. The question I have is that we've got a good breakdown of the project totals here, 554 and what's encumbered, and I get that. At the top, we have total expended, but it's not matching what the project totals are. So is it fair to say that the difference between these two is what was been utilized for internally in cities, part of the city budget or city staff time to manage these contracts and do the ride-alongs and manage the contracts?
This is Danny Walters. I apologize. That appears to be a math error on my part. I originally thought that more money had been spent for the support site and winter emergency shelter, and I fixed it in the body of it, but it did not carry up. It wasn't an automatic fill, but the amount moving forward is the correct amount.
Gotcha.
And the amount spent, that 554,324, is the correct amount. None of these particular funds went to administering these programs. So,
okay. And the budget allocation for next year is, as the memo mentioned, was 843,000. Has staff come to contractual agreements with, they say, these same organizations related to utilization of those funds?
That is something that we are currently working through. We are taking a very strong look at those agreements and what those performance measures and metrics are that we need to see how we're moving the needle in this space. So that is still something that we are working through.
And yeah, Chris, I might jump in just real quick, and if that's okay, and just add to Danny's comments. I think one of the challenges with spending the full appropriation in 2022 was that we were also creating and trying to recruit for two really critical positions, a project manager and a system coordinator. And so that was in response to the KU CPPR study that identified a number of different needs of capacity development in the continuum of care here locally in Douglas County. And so those positions, I think we onboarded Cicely and Jen in late May, June timeframe. Danny, correct me if I'm way off on that, but that's generally, correct. Yeah. And so what we had anticipated was, at least 10 months of the year, we would have experts filling those positions and really being able to get to work on the capacity development in the system with provider agencies. But what we ended up getting was only really, 6 or 7 months of that. Well, 5 or 6 months of that. And like Danny said, we did go out to market to try to get providers under contract to run sheltering and support site operations, and were unsuccessful getting responsive proposals for that, which I think is just yet another indication that there's a lot of additional capacity development that is needed within our providers here locally. And so when Danny says she's working on contracts and working on identifying appropriate service levels, really a lot of that work, I think, is trying to ramp up, increase the amount of services that are available in our community for this population in particular. And so, that is hard work. We have a lot of smaller nonprofits in our community that maybe don't have the same capacity that you would find in Jackson County or Sedgwick County or some of the other larger communities in Kansas or in the Midwest. And so it's not like some of these agencies can just all of a sudden scale up and we have the capacity to serve 300 people with complex needs. And so I think there's still, it's some iterative work, capacity development work. But I do see us within 2023 really getting a much better feel for how to work with those agencies to increase the capacity.
Sure. Johnson, go ahead, Chris.
That's not sure. I wasn't really questioning 2022 spending. I know we were building.
Right. Yeah.
We were building the airplane as we were flying a little bit. 2022.
Exactly.
On that though, I think this connects really well to Dan's. I don't think this does connect really well to what Dan was saying about the timeline. And this board from the very beginning of this conversation has said, hey, we don't even have a needs assessment yet. We don't know what we're doing. We don't have a plan. So what if we had a whole year of transition for these agencies and say like, hey, this is the last year we're doing this funding, then we're going to transition to this. Or how about we wait and make final decisions after we get this needs assessment? How about we know what we're doing? And again, it's a year and a half later and the funds aren't spent, like this is money that these agencies could have used for prevention work.
Yeah.
And the city staff took the money and it hasn't been able to even be spent. There's no plan. There still isn't a strategic plan for these funds. And it's a lot of money. It's not just the 800 from our board, like this is a big deal. And it's really hard to watch it happen. When we know in August, we were like, hey, how about we have a plan before we start doing this, and then to watch a year and a half later, we aren't seeing the result
I understand, and I want to honor that frustration. I really do, and so, but I do want to just offer a little bit of context, which I think the board is aware of. But some of this really may be some of the challenge, I think, is rooted in the timing of the budget, and the state statute spells out that timeline for us. And so, we start budgeting very early in the year for a budget that we won't start spending out of it for another, 10 months. And so it's not an excuse. It doesn't make up for the frustration and the communication challenges between staff and the board. But I think, it makes the change process difficult when you don't budget on the calendar year. You budget you budget on the calendar year, but you have to put that budget together 10 to 12 months in advance.
This is Kim Johnson. Can you hear me okay?
I think a lot of the agencies serve experience that same timeline. And Brandon, would you say that maybe those timeline struggles wouldn't have been an issue if the board hadn't been eliminated from the process? Because that would have given the city the flexibility to reimagine how these funds are used outside of the budget approval timeline, and that the really having to push this forward and make the decision before we had all the information we need. And I say we as like a community, not as a board. That was what caused the timeline issues. Like putting it in a city department and moving it out of the purview of this board is the cause of the timeline issues. So it can't be also an excuse for the timeline issues. Right. Yeah. And I would say the motivation in the city with the city manager's recommended budget for 2022 and 2023 was the motivation wasn't to exclude the board. It was to drive funding to homelessness response services. And so I agree. I think we share that goal. And so I think, hindsight 2020, there were different ways that we could have approached that. And I think it would have made for a more effective relationship.
This is Chris. And Kim had something that she wanted to say, so I'm going to give Kim opportunity. And then I want to honor the frustrations that we have, like Brandon said, but I do want to try to find a way to move forward with this because it has been a year and a half. We are relitigating stuff that Brandon wasn't part of. I'd like to try to start looking solutions based on like what is a solution that we as a board can be, and how are we going to do that? And it might not be this meeting, but maybe it's the next meeting. But I want to respect everybody's time, and we still have a presentation for the ARPA money that we've got to get through. So I don't want to cut anybody off, but I do want to kind of try to move forward with what's the next right steps going for this board and for us working with city staff as it relates to this money. So Kim, floor is yours, finally. I think you're on mute, Kim.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Number one, that's exactly what I was trying to say, how ironic. But number one is I think, Brandon, clearly thank you. But the difference is with what I think everyone's trying to say is you guys work for the community. You work for the city. We work in the city. And that's why we're trying to share our lens. Number two is during our meeting today, are we going to discuss that balance and how it should be allocated?
This is Chris. I think that balance has still been, and Brandon can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the balance of those funds, that full $800,000 was part of the housing initiative department or the housing department. So it's still within the purview of the housing department in terms of the distribution of those funds. But going back to what we discussed earlier is whether that's something how we want to do that moving forward. If it's going outside of the city, then interpretation of whether we should be able to still be part of that process and make recommendations or not. I think that's still up for the debate. So the 224, as I see it, is still part of the original 800. That's part of the housing department purview. And same with the 843 for 2023.
Right.
I
agree.
Sorry, I have one other question as it relates to this, but.
Well, this is Kim Johnson. Brandon, can you confirm or not that that money is going to set in housing the overage? And if it is going to set in housing, why?
Yes, I agree with Chris's response. It is anticipated to be spent in this year, 2023. And really, I think a lot of it we were hoping to already have spent. We're laying the groundwork for spending that. It was just a matter of timing. And so, but I think I offered in the last meeting, and the offer still stands. And I think we'll probably just try to do this proactively. But as we develop additional contracts and are able to advance spending plans for these funds, we will share those. We're happy to share those with the board. I know that's not the process that the ordinance calls for, but we're happy to share those with the board.
My question this is Chris, my other question I had as it relates to the spending of this, Lawrence Community Shelter had been historically paid out of the general fund, if I'm correct. And I know this is just a second half payment. So is the anticipation moving forward that the Lawrence Community Shelter allocation that's approved by the board would be spent out of the special alcohol tax, 843,000 moving forward, and its full capacity, not necessarily the second half allocation?
Right. Yeah, great question, Chris. I think really that is going to come down to City Commission direction and what their goals are for the budget. Part of the challenge that we were facing the last 2 years is we knew we needed to, and we knew there was a policy expectation to increase, substantially increase funding and services for homelessness response, but at the same time maintain a flat mill levy, which is one of the primary sources of the general fund. And so part of the reason for using special alcohol funds was a result of looking at the full picture of the budget and trying to identify what funds would be legally and appropriately used for homelessness response. So I can't speak specifically about what will happen through the 2024 budget. The City Commission has a number of different options that they can consider and choose from. And I know that they're going to want to hear probably the advisory board and the community's input as they review those options. So
I think that's a little bit pie in the sky that they'd want to hear the opinion of the advisory board. But thanks for bringing up that LCS money, Chris. So help me understand this, Brandon. So once any money in the housing department, that budget, that spending, the only time the commission touches that is in the annual budget approval, right? Like after that, the housing department doesn't have to go back to the commission for approval on any spending.
That's not accurate. Actually, the contracts do go back to the City Commission, and the City Commission actually every week, one of the first actions on their agenda is the approval of claims. Claims being money that we've committed for purchase of goods and services. And so, but specifically, the Lawrence Community Shelter contract has been discussed on a couple of occasions by the City Commission here in the last year. So they're watching that contract in particular, as well as I believe the Burt Nash contract has also been on there.
Okay, cool. That's kind of hard for me to understand because I feel like when I was trying to follow that ARPA money, it said that the housing department budget their spending doesn't have to go through commission. But so the contracts would be separate. So thinking about the LCS money, that's contracted, that's a whole separate thing. So moving it to this, what are the repercussions of moving money to this part of the budget, the alcohol tax funds?
I'm not sure of repercussions. I guess what we were trying to accomplish through the budget was to increase funding for homelessness response services while also maintaining a flat mill levy. And so that, it helped accomplish that result. And maybe I'm not understanding the question, Mandy, so sorry if I didn't answer it.
No, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to figure out. It just seems, because the LCS has been talked about a lot and been made to, I think most organizations, when there's a contract signed that they're going to get this amount of money, they don't have to come back and advocate for that money multiple times a year. So I just wonder why it was moved in the context of that. But that's really, if there's not a simple answer, we don't have time for it. So I'll put it on the back burner.
Well, actually, I think I probably can respond directly to that. Originally, earlier in 2022, the Housing Initiatives team did bring the full contract to the City Commission, and the City Commission actually, they had quite a bit of discussion, and they decided to only authorize, I believe, 50% of the contract, and then LCS would have to come back mid-year and have another discussion with the City Commission before they would authorize the second half of that contract. And that did occur. I think the first discussion was last spring, second discussion was later in the summer.
Right, yeah. So, sorry, that was off track.
Anybody else have any further questions that relates to the spreadsheet here that shows the spending? If not, I know we don't have an approval or anything like that, but I would just ask that, let's add this as part of the agenda, or however we can make this public. Just make sure, as Danny mentioned, maybe update that top line to ensure that we've got the right number on there before we publish that.
I do actually have a question, and it might be a big question, and I realize the time is an issue, but and Mandy kind of referenced this earlier, but I am curious, looking at this, for folks who have been around long enough that they were on a part of the group when we were actually making recommendations. I am curious how this compares to those previous budgets, especially both in the organizations that are being funded, but then also just the amount spent, because it does seem like the amount out of what was allocated here, there's a pretty big gap in the actual spending, which, to me, some of that's normal, is always going to happen, but I do also feel like, when a process is followed more smoothly and people are given, sort of, sometimes when you drop money in someone's lap, they don't necessarily have a perfect way to spend it. And so to me, that goes to the question of process. And I'm wondering if in years prior, when folks were submitting RFPs and having, advisory board input prior to the funding allocation, I'm just curious if more of the allocated funding was actually, like, a higher percentage was spent in those years. Because I do. Everybody on this board agrees that housing and homelessness are serious issues, and so for me, outside of our specific purview of giving recommendations, when I see a gap in the money that's allocated versus the money that's spent, to me that just is worrying, because that's money that could actively have helped people that is just that didn't get put into supplies or programs or whatever was originally the concept for how to help those people. So I am curious if anybody knows or can pull up or has experience, folks who've been around longer than I have, just about the percentage of funds utilized in this budget where it was sort of just allocated by the city versus in the past when there was a more thorough process.
This is Chris, I might have longest tenure because I think Tim might have dropped off. I think he was on it longer than I have, but the one period I have, I think we spent 100% of the allocation is my recollection from in 2020.
Great,
Yeah, I
thank you.
can't imagine even going back to the Social Service Advisory Board that there's ever been carryover funds.
And there was
I don't know how old that is. How many decades have we done social service funding and through this board, including the Social Service Advisory Board era? I don't know how far back it goes.
Yeah, well, this
is Kim Johnson. This is Kim Johnson, and thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a good point. The fact that we have carry forward money kind of shows, you know, the individuals that were using it in the past. I mean, I hope that everyone pays attention that this is a clear view that those organizations really did need and use that money. Thus, this year truly did impact them.
Agreed. Smith, and you know, for me, like, you know, I'm involved in and have been involved in numbers of conversations about allocating funds, so that's something that I always bring up in those conversations, or that is always discussed in those conversations, is does an agency actually have the capacity to utilize the amount of funds they're given? I mean, if I gave the community shelter $1 billion next year, you know, it seems amazing, and obviously long term it could be, but you know, do they have the staff capacity to actually utilize that money? Or, you know, I mean, some agencies might scramble to try and spend as much as possible. I mean, some folks might, you know, just leave some money on the table because reasonably they cannot possibly utilize that in an effective way. So it's just, I think that's one of the things that goes into that decision-making process. And hearing from what sounds like in the past, when we were involved in the process and we were making some of those recommendations, there was never, seemingly never, at least not frequently, a gap in the amount of funds allocated versus the funds that were spent, versus what we're looking at now, where there is a significant gap. You know, the process can change and it might change, but you know, that alone seems like an indication that maybe, you know, our involvement in the past actually, you know, even though we have no power and we just give recommendations, maybe our recommendations and input, and maybe the process of RFPs and not and having, you know, agencies being given the opportunity to step up to the table and make specific requests for amounts, you know, that amounts that they would be able to reasonably spend. Maybe there was some value there, and maybe that value has been lost. And really for me, I also, you know, the value that's lost is part of it. And I also just ultimately, you know, we've talked about this a bunch of times in these meetings where we meet and discuss the process. I just don't ultimately understand what value is gained from having our input removed from the process. The lack of transparency is definitely an issue. And I feel like every time we ever talk about these things, I always try and draw a distinction between having an issue with the process and lack of transparency and all those things and the actual outcomes. You know, these organizations are great, and you know, funding them, it does make sense. But you know, having a lack of transparency there and having us not have an opportunity to give our input, I don't really see what that's adding to the process. You know, none of us are getting. I realize, you know, staff time is a real concern, and you know, I always, you know, thank staff for being here, and I know Kurt's over there handling all the tech stuff, but you know, we volunteer our time to do this, and so I don't really see what the city is gaining from not allowing us to just, you know, have at least a modicum of input in the process. And the lack of transparency around this and some of the other decisions that have been going on regarding housing. You know, a lot of these funds in the budget went to the camp, which you know, I think is a necessary effort. But there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on with the camp that I personally, and I don't think most people in the community understand why they happened, who made the decisions. And so that lack of transparency, on top of my concerns about the process, I am also concerned about some of the outcomes. Some of the outcomes do not seem like they've necessarily unfolded in a very you know, a very clean way. Things got a little bit messy, and I wonder if some more input and some more transparency could potentially be beneficial there. And I also I have to say that, you know, us as random you know, residents of Lawrence, and also folks with a lot of experience in you know, nonprofits and social services, you know, I think our input is definitely, you know, the city seems like it's very interested in hearing from folks who live here, and so I feel like our input as any resident input is something that the city should want to hear, and we haven't been given the opportunity. And simultaneous to that, I know that, you know, yesterday the city had a listening session with landlords that were specifically invited to come in and give their input on potential you know, new efforts to reduce housing discrimination. And to me, you know, when homelessness and housing is supposed to be the end goal we're trying to achieve, you know, I think housing discrimination is definitely something that can work towards that. So it's just interesting to me that the city is going out of their way to personally invite people who don't even live in our community, who see housing as an investment for them to make money, to give their input on new things that we could be doing to help folks who are struggling to be housed. It just seems like that's just a real disconnect for me. You know, when we are specifically tasked, our duty is to give input, and we're not being given that opportunity. It just seems very striking that people who are profiting off of the suffering of Lawrence residents are actively being invited to come and speak at length to the city commission, and we don't even get a say on how the special alcohol funds are allocated. So I feel like there is potentially some value left in this board and our function. And so, you know, obviously we're willing to meet. We're all here. We got here at 8:30. So if there is still an opportunity for us to give any input prior to the allocation of funds next year, I feel like it's worth considering. And, you know, we've had special meetings before. We make time for this stuff. So
it's now 9:32. I want to respect everybody's time, but we have to move on from this topic. We either need to move the next agenda item to another board meeting, or we need to have a quick presentation on the ARPA money. I'd rather go ahead and get the presentation on the ARPA money instead of doing a second meeting on that. So unless anybody has any objection, can we stay maybe another 15 minutes or so to finish out the rest of this agenda?
Yeah, I don't have any objection. I want to thank Dan for his comments. I agree with him completely. And I think one of the really important issues that we need to address, and it's not happening in this meeting, we don't have the time, is getting back to how does the city justify bypassing this board? You know, I don't know how the mechanics work with having a statute. So I want this on another agenda item for a special meeting or something.
Right. Well, I have a proposal that we'll talk about at in the new business section of this agenda. We maybe discuss that. So I'd like to move on and give Danny the floor. Thank you everybody for the comments, and Brandon and staff for comments, but I'd like to give the floor to Danny for the presentation of the federal ARPA funds. Just, I guess, an update on the City Commission's ARPA funds.
Thank you. I can actually make this not long, so and we're happy to also tie this on to the agenda packet. So can you all see my screen there? Okay, great. This is just kind of an outline of the projects that the City Commission went ahead and told us we could explore and move forward on. So the first line item is looking at two things. It's kind of looking at where some of those gaps were in funding that was awarded through the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and where some of the applications fell in. So the first few that you're seeing here, Flint Hills, Wheatland, Those are actually low-income housing tax credit projects that were funded through the state that also received a smaller allocation from AHAB, but we were able to make up the gap here. And this is Leah Roslin's territory, so I'm gonna, hopefully there's not too deep of questions on these, but Success by Six and Centro Hispano had an application that they put in for a doula program, and that's included on here. And then Tenants to Homeowners had received some funding from the county ARP money to purchase land for affordable housing. And this $1 million will help with the development on that land. I think somebody earlier alluded to the DECA project. That was included on here. Same with the Burt Nash supported and rehabilitative permanent housing. That's one where they are actually still looking for a location for that. So that money is earmarked for that. The next couple would be more staffing related. We are interested in contracting with a community engagement specialist to just really be focused on this space of homeless programs and affordable housing and housing initiatives. That component of it really is a full-time job. And that's something that we need to be better at, and we definitely understand that. That also includes a street outreach provider. One of the challenges that the homeless programs team has had is we've been in a very reactive space, and having to do a lot of outreach ourselves and case management and working directly in client services. So this is to kind of help bridge the gap of kind of where some of that is lacking. It also is to bridge us through to a separate application that we had submitted with the Kansas Statewide Homeless Coalition for some additional street outreach team. So this was a shorter term ask to bridge us to when that other funding would potentially be awarded. Mandy, did you?
I have a couple questions, and I don't want them to pile up too deep before I ask them. How many affordable units will be in these development projects? The two from Kresnik and the one from the out-of-town folks.
I will have to get back with you guys on that. I want to say that one was 48 and one was 24. Like, I mean, they're a good amount of.
Good. Are they fully affordable housing, or are they like some market rate, retail on the bottom, kind of like
there may be some element of mixed use in there. I would have to go back and look. I apologize. Like I said, that's Leah's piece.
Do you know, is there a timeline on the affordable housing? Like, he'll keep them affordable for the length, like the requirement for the tax credits, and after that they'll go to market rate?
The tax credits are originally 15 years, and then you can extend that to 30 years. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe both of those projects do have 30-year affordability periods on them. So and then the tenants to homeowners piece would be permanently affordable.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned an application. I'm so excited. I love Richmonder and the Doulas project. So just like we keep saying about housing, like we're all for this stuff. You said there was an application.
I probably used the wrong word there. It was a proposal. Rich had submitted it after seeing that item on the agenda. So it was something separate.
Okay, so I sort of reached out, like in the board capacity at the same time. We saw like, 8.3 million, 8.4 million, whatever it was, and ARPA, and this board was told early 2022 that if the city received enough state and federal ARPA money to fund the housing initiatives work, that we would be given our 770 back to move forward with. So that was another way that I feel like the staff and commission kind of put us off, like kept giving us hope we get this money back. We just got to wait and see. We got to wait and see. So when it was December 6th or whatever, and there's 8.3 that we're scrambling to spend, it seemed very appropriate for us to get those funds back. So I reached out at that time, which I'm assuming is the same time that Rich reached out. And it was not communicated that there was a process or an application or anything. Like, could we have said to these nonprofits that weren't funded in 2022 that maybe they could reach out also and make this accessible and equitable, which is what we've been asking for the last year and a half, to like make this really transparent and be like, hey, this money is available and you don't have to be an insider watching all the meetings, playing politics, knowing the game, you know, knowing who to call to get funding, you know? So it was just sort of by chance that happened.
Well, I mean, I can only, you know, speak to the two meetings on December 6th and December 20th. Mm-hmm. December 6th, the agenda item went out. The proposal for Rich's project was submitted as an agenda attachment. Mm-hmm. The city commission on the 6th kind of put a pause on making any decisions. And Brandon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm mistaken here, but I think at that time they didn't commit either way to taking applications or not taking applications. But I think they wanted to give the public the ability to, you know, to kind of do what Rich did and submit proposals. And Brandon, do you want to?
That's how I remember it as well. Yeah.
Are there other questions, or do you want me to move on here?
I think we can keep moving on. Thank you.
The second part of that number 4 item does also include some additional staffing capacity for winter shelter. We have been running into some issues obtaining volunteers, and so we're really trying to make sure that we've got adequate paid staff that can cover all the shifts that we need. So we're getting there. We've hired quite a few folks, and we want to bring some more in. This also would help if we do have a situation where there's a winter emergency shelter overflow that we need to look at. So that is that item. The city commission tabled the request for an updated housing needs assessment and market analysis. The last one had been done in 2018, and obviously a lot has happened since 2018. So the thought was that it would be a good idea to try to get a handle on where that's changed at this point. And then the last project is one that is still very much something that we are working on, because there is a lot of moving parts and pieces to it. But it would be a modular shelter project for unsheltered individuals and families in our community. We're looking at land for a location. We're looking at these modular units, which include heat, air. The communities that you can build around them include restrooms, laundry. It really is a community and village type place. That would be also something where we would have other agencies be able to provide services at that location. So, you know, Heartland, RADAC, DECA, Burt Nash, like, you know, all of our partners that have a hand in the work with this population. So definitely more to come on that one. That's one that folks are going to see multiple times here as we're, you know, kind of getting through the finer points of what that project looks like. So that is what we're looking at as our medium term solution. We've kind of had to look at things as short term, medium term, and then longer term, obviously being adequate supportive housing available for all. So there is a 3 to 5 year kind of gap from where we are and when that will be available, that we need to have something to provide. So
one more question,
Yep.
Danny.
Mm-hmm.
Community engagement specialist. There was a citywide position on community engagement in the budget for 2022. Was that ever filled?
It was, yes. That was filled. This one would be just for the housing and homeless programs.
And it's currently filled, that position?
The city position, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and this position would work very closely with our city communications team. But yeah, this would be where their focus is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have any more questions.
You've given us 2 minutes, so if there's no other further questions on this. Danny, appreciate your presentation and thoroughness on this. If anybody has any other questions, we'll move on to new business. All right, hearing none. So I have 2 items for new business, and anybody else can also bring up. First item is the board, the makeup of the board. Currently, we have 1 open position, and it's the United Way liaison. Mandy was filling that United Way liaison position. Do we have, I assume that Mandy's now an at-large member, and that we need to fill the United Way liaison position.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Chris. I do believe my replacement will start on Monday. So we can have city staff or somebody reach out to that individual about joining our next meeting. So I think we can fill that by the next meeting. And just to put it out there on the record, because we got such a runaround when Dan left the United Way seat on this board and I took it, and then we acted like Dan had to be reappointed and we couldn't have a quorum, and we missed a whole bunch of meetings at the end of last year. I want to just put it out there. I was appointed not in the United Way seat originally. So there's no way we can say that I have to be kicked off and reappointed and we can't have meetings because we don't have a quorum moving forward, since we've been through it already.
So Brandon, do you mind reaching out to United Way to connect with them to appoint their liaison for this board?
I can do that. I'm not trying to give you the runaround, Mandy, but I just want to make sure that, the city commission has a policy for how board positions are appointed. So I haven't reviewed it in terms of how to fill this position, but I just want to make sure that we do so consistent with that policy. So it may require a mayoral nomination and approval of the city commission. I haven't reviewed it for that purpose specifically.
I can't imagine.
I will send
originally appointed in that seat, in this seat, that it would, and I didn't have to be reappointed to take the United Way seat, so I shouldn't have to be reappointed to take my old seat back.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just making sure that to fill the vacant position, we follow.
Oh, sure.
The ordinance or resolution. So yeah. I'll research that and see if we can talk to the mayor about it as well. And then I will update the board by email just to let you know kind of what we decide needs to happen procedurally.
Perfect. Second item, as we mentioned earlier about wanting to move forward in a way that we're all productive and part of the process. I would like to propose that potentially that we have a board retreat, that we can listen to city staff and housing department of how the current process is actually done. And I know we have an issue with everybody gathering and be an open meeting. And my goal would be to not necessarily make this about doing business as a board, but understanding how this works. We're not limited on the amount of time that everybody has, but everybody committing a longer period of time of understanding what the process is, what the outcomes are, what is the response, everything that goes into this process. And then we as a board can have a board meeting and we can consume that information and come back with some proposals as to here's how we can effectively be part of this process moving forward. I'm open for, and I want to make this pretty quick, but anybody have any opinions or thoughts on that? Or Brandon, is that something that we can do without it happen to be an Open Meetings Act or open meeting?
Yes, advisory, I think it's actually a good practice for advisory boards to do retreats, goal setting and such. So we can help, city staff can help identify dates that work for the board members and get that scheduled for you.
Okay, that'd be fantastic.
I like that idea, Chris. And I lost it. Crap. It had something to do with Dan. Oh, the timeline on that. What's that committee you're on, Dan?
I just call it the committee. It's
the committee.
I'm terrible. The name is actually really difficult to remember. I can look it up though. I'm sure Brandon knows.
Yeah, I'm on that committee as well. Just a committee to make decisions on committees. Good enough.
Yeah. So can you tell us more about that timeline, Brandon? With this board, I think we've had an ongoing fear that we'll be dissolved before we can finish our business.
I think, and Chris or Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's a 4-month timeline that committee is trying to accomplish its work in.
And no boards will be dissolved before that's done?
No, not that I'm aware of. The committee's not necessarily, wasn't formed to dissolve boards. It was to make recommendations to make the whole, 40+ advisory board structure more effective and better aligned with the city's strategic plan. So,
but this is Chris. We don't have any actions to be taken as an advisory committee at this point in time. So we could postpone a retreat until the point in time in which we know whether this is going to be dissolved, if that's what you're proposing. But I would propose that we just have a retreat, and if it happens, it happens.
No, I want to move faster so we aren't dissolved before we can do work.
Gotcha. All right, so Brandon will work towards getting that put together for us. Anybody else have any new business that they have for this committee?
I don't have any new business, but I do want to comment on the Lawrence Times article. There's a quote from Porter in there that I just want to acknowledge really conflicts with the information we've been provided over the last year. If everybody hasn't had a chance to read it, I hope you'll look it over. And it really goes back to the lack of transparency and honesty that this board has experienced over the last year. And we can carry that forward to our retreat or next meeting.
Yeah, let's carry that forward to the next retreat or to the retreat. I think that'll be helpful and effective as we try to figure out how we move forward with it. So if no other new business, let's move on to if there's any public comment, if there's anybody online or anybody on site with Brandon as it relates to public comment.
Yeah, nobody here, and I'm not seeing anybody else online, Chris.
All right, well, we will close public comment at this time, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the City Alcohol Tax Advisory Committee.
Chris, this is Daniel B. Smith. I'm going to interject before you adjourn. I'm going to interrupt your adjournment just to, as always, I just literally every meeting, just thank the rest of you for volunteering to be on the committee. And then also to legitimately thank the staff who are here. I feel like these meetings, compared to other meetings I'm in, often seem more like, combative or whatever, but hopefully everyone understands that we really appreciate them. I mean, you're giving us a lot of time to air grievances and everything. And, our goal, I think the goal of everybody who's involved in this board and the city staff is literally the same goal. We all want to see these positive changes happen. So if anything that we said, you made your day a little bit harder as a city staff person, personally an apology there, and just know that you're appreciated, and especially Kurt, who's in the back. I know you're there, Kurt. That's all I'll say. But then, yeah, I will motion to adjourn if we need one.
Great, Dan, thank you. So, second. that motion.
We have a motion, a second to adjourn. We have all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Hearing none. We'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff. We appreciate everybody's time and commitment to this board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See everybody.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
You too.